through a little bit of a review of vector notation, because although vectors come up in BC Calc as a calc thing, we should have also seen them in either Algebra 2 or Pre-Calc. So first off, vectors have both a magnitude and a direction. So what I didn't write here was the opposite, or the other thing that we often say in conjunction with vectors, are scalars. So for instance, a vector might be something like velocity, right? Because you can be traveling 60 miles per hour south. That's got a magnitude, the 60 miles per hour, and a direction south. But a speed does not have direction, it only has magnitude. So if someone pulls you over for speeding and you're going 60 miles per hour south, they only talk about your speed, the 60 miles per hour. They don't consider it a negative 60 miles per hour because it's south. They just care about your speed, not a direction, right? In textbooks, you'll often see that vectors are bolded, but in handwriting, it doesn't make sense for us to just aggressively trace over a letter, like over and over and over again, so we don't. What we usually do is draw them either with little arrows or hats. Now, I personally usually draw them with a little arrow on top because it's a vector, so an R here with an arrow on top. But you'll see some textbooks that draw them with like an R and then almost like a little caret, like a hat. That's also completely fine. I always just draw mine with an arrow. So this R with the arrow on top is a vector because of the arrow. If it had just been an R without the arrow, it wouldn't be a vector. Again, in a textbook, you might see it in bold instead of with the little arrow on top or the little hat on top. For vectors that occur in 2 dimensions, or eventually 3, but most of the time for us now we're talking about 2, there are 2 common notations. So one of them is that this vector R, and then we use the pointy brackets essentially, right? So we use the little greater than and less than symbols, for lack of a better example, and we say that in this pointy set of parentheses, we have x of t as the first coordinate. That's essentially the direction with respect to time for x, and then the second coordinate is y. Now, if we were talking about 3 coordinates, which someday later in math you could be, then it would be x, comma, y, comma, z. And again, the pointy brackets indicate a vector. So I always think about it that they look kind of like a V on their side, V for vector. The other way you'll see this notation is what's called IJ notation. So the I vector, which is an I with a little arrow on top, or again, if you like it better, you could put an I with a little hat on top and a J with a little hat on top. The I and J vectors are unit vectors, which means that they are 1 unit in length. So the J vector starts at the origin and goes up 1 unit, exactly 1 on the y-axis. The I vector starts at the origin and goes 1 unit exactly over on the x-axis. So they're unit vectors. So the other way you'll see R written, the vector, is x of t times the unit vector in the x direction, because x of t is in the x direction, plus y of t times the unit vector in the j direction. These 2 notations mean exactly the same thing, and in terms of which one you use, I always recommend that my students just regurgitate the notation that's handed to them back. So if they're handed a problem in IJ notation, they should lean into the IJ notation and stay with it. If they're handed a problem that's in this parenthetical notation, then they should stay with it. That said, if I'm choosing my own notation for a problem, I much prefer the parenthetical to the IJ notation. But again, I and J are just giving you the direction. They're saying the x direction and the y direction. They're not acting as a variable. Again, it's sort of like adding the word south or the word east behind something. So this is indicating horizontal motion, and this is indicating vertical motion.